My name is Matthew Harding, although my Muslim name and the name that my wife and my family and my friends know me as is Abdul Malik. I'm 40 years old. I was born in South London and I grew up just outside London in Guildford. I had a fairly normal upbringing. I grew up in the 1980s. I went initially to a secondary state comprehensive school, and then I moved from there to a boarding school. I come from quite a small family. I just have one sister. We were brought up in a Christian, Protestant, Anglican family. We went to church every Sunday. I sang in the choir in the church. We went to a Church of England school, so we were brought up in the Anglican faith. Although my father, he moved away from this and he became a Quaker, and so I had some experience of that as well. My mother has stayed within the Anglican faith. The first ever thing I saw about Islam, it was actually in a textbook at my school, at my comprehensive school. I think the textbook was probably from the 1960s or 1970s, and it touched on, there was a small part about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it sort of gave a fairly skewed view of Islam. If I can remember rightly, there might even been some suggestion that it was an offshoot of Christianity. So I didn't really, it was intriguing and interesting to read about this man, but I didn't make the connection at the time that it was a major religion. When I was about in my early 20s, I moved into a house that I shared with some friends, and one of these friends started to talk to me about other beliefs. So it was through my friends that I was living with that I started to learn about Buddhism, and I became very intrigued and very interested. But I've never been somebody who could, I don't feel totally fulfilled just by reading something. I actually want to go in and experience it. So I started doing some research, and I found that there was a Buddhist group in a nearby town, and I became a sort of regular attendee at their sort of weekday meditation meetings. The focus of the religion was very much on the self and on sort of monitoring one's mind and focusing on the breath in meditation. And there was also quite a lot of focus on the Buddha, and I was aware that in the monasteries there were these huge, quite large sort of gold-coloured statues of Buddhas, and there was a lot of prostrating in front of the statue of the Buddha. And I was never 100% sure, and I'm sure that this was more of a ceremonial thing than proper worship, but it was just something that I was very uncomfortable with. And I was also increasingly aware that I had, from my Christian upbringing, a belief in God, and this wasn't being catered for within Buddhism. They weren't saying that God didn't exist, but it was very much that it's not the key issue that you need to focus on. And I was aware that I almost like I was having a dialogue with God at the same time, thinking, well, you are a part of my life. So, you know, it was through that I realised that I needed to keep looking for other beliefs. And Islam, I'd become aware of Islam through reading history books and travel books. Probably the first time I actually made an effort to actually go and meet Muslims. I did what I'd done with the Buddhist community. I tried to see if there were local communities, and I was aware that there was a Surrey University Muslim Council or Union in the university which I lived just next door to, and I was also aware that there was a mosque in Woking. So I wrote to both of these places, but I didn't get any response to them. So it didn't put me off. I just thought, okay, try and approach this from a different angle. So then I thought, okay, I was aware of Regent's Park Mosque, and I knew it was a big place, and I figured that it must be some sort of centre for Muslims in London. And I went into the mosque, and I was quite nervous. This was quite a cold atmosphere, and I was shown into, I suppose it would be the Imam's office there, and I just explained the little bit that I'd studied about Islam and my interest in it, and he didn't really seem to be that interested in what I was saying. He waited until I'd finished, and then he said, have you read the Quran, or have you read some of the Quran? And I said, well, no, I haven't. So he gave me a copy of the Quran, and he gave me some pamphlets on you know, what Jesus means to Muslims, and there was also, I think, a few on sort of Christianity and how it's possibly a bit deviant. And he just said, you know, go away and read this, and you have questions, come back. And I suppose I was quite disappointed, because I'd made the effort to go up there by train, and you know, I wanted a bit more. I was hoping to make some sort of connection, you know, and I didn't. I walked out the mosque with a copy of the Quran and the pamphlets. I just binned them, because I don't like when other people criticise other people's beliefs or faiths. You know, what I've chosen to do by coming to Islam is my choice, but I don't like, you know, I don't like something written down dictating what's right and what's wrong. So I binned those. I kept the Quran. I came home. I glanced through the Quran. I tried reading the English interpretation of it. I have to admit I was quite confused by a lot of it. Obviously, since then I've studied a bit more, and I realised that it refers to many things within the Old Testament. But at the time I had no clue. I knew that Muslims believed that it was the word of God, but I didn't know who God was addressing, who God was referring to, or who God was talking about. It seemed very confusing. So I probably, after about a week, I just put it on my shelf, and I got on with my plans to go backpacking. I was aware that I'd been going through mainly Muslim countries, so I guess I felt that I'd probably get more of a flavour of the religion through doing that than by going to the mosque in London. So I flew to Istanbul without booking a hotel or anything. I just flew there in the afternoon. I thought it's a big city, I'll find a hotel. And I found a little hotel down a side street, and I wasn't aware that there was a mosque right next door to it, sort of down an alleyway, a little tiny mosque. And I got myself established in this dormitory room, and then I decided I'd have a cigarette, because I still smoked then. And I've never been comfortable smoking indoors. I like smoking outdoors, so I thought this has got to have a flat roof. I'll go up on the roof. So this was probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I went up on the roof, about to light up, and all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, was this, you know, the azan from this little tiny mosque, and through a sort of probably quite a crude speaker, so I couldn't actually understand what was being said, even though I wouldn't know Arabic anyway. But of course then it's picked up by the next mosque down the street, and then another one, and then other mosques across the city, and the big mosque, the blue mosque, the Osmani mosque, and the mosques across the water on the other side, on the Asian side. So this azan sort of moved around the whole city. Meanwhile, this azan next to the hotel is still going on. And it had a very profound effect on me. I can't say that I became a Muslim at that time, but it was the sound of the azan. Although it was very foreign to me, there was something very familiar about it, and I can't even now say what it was. But I found it very calming. I travelled through Syria, and I became aware of the sort of character, the easygoing character of the Arabs that I've met in Syria. They seem to be the same in Jordan. And then I decided I'd go to Israel as well. And the contrast between these Arabs in Aqaba, in Jordan and Aqaba, and the Israelis was quite startling. I mean, the Israelis are far more Western, much colder in a way, much less friendly, much less welcoming. They didn't have the warmth of the Arab people that I've been travelling with. I spent a few days in Jerusalem. It's a fascinating city, but very stressful. There's a real atmosphere there. And after a few days, my friend said, do you want to visit Gaza? And I said, can you go to Gaza? He said, yeah, we can get a minibus from the Damascus gate, and we can go to Gaza. It's $20. I said, well, okay, let's go to Gaza. And we spent just one night in Gaza, and we met some English students who wanted to show us around and practice their English. It was a very sad place. These English language students took me around the beach camp, this refugee camp in the centre. And I just remember, it was September, but I just remember the heat of the place and the smell, and they just said, that's one tap, and that tap's for 6 or 7 families, and they're just living in these little rooms. And it just seemed incredible that these people were forced to live in such a confined space. Again, at the time I wasn't a Muslim. Islam was just in the back of my head. I was still thinking about it, but I was very, very angry at what I saw. And I guess I was struck by their patience, and also that they were smiling and they were carrying on. There was an internet cafe there. One of the guys that was working there was from Lewisham in South London. Most of my family are from Lewisham, so it was quite funny to meet these people, you know. And people just got on with their lives as best they could. But you know, it was a sort of almost. It struck me that their lives were sort of put on hold. They weren't in control of their own existence. They were all reliant on the border crossing and money coming in and jobs elsewhere. When I came back again, I was probably not living the sort of life that was typical from somebody my age. I went to the pub sometimes, but I didn't drink much. I didn't drink heavily. I didn't go to clubs. I didn't go to parties. I was probably becoming something of a recluse, and I was looking for something. I wasn't finding fulfillment in my job, and I wasn't finding fulfillment in the media and you know, the sort of things that other people find enjoyment in. I was looking for something more, and it was at that stage that I, you know, this idea of was Islam something that I could, you know, adopt? Would it be something that I could, you know, find comfort in? And at that time I'd seen a film about Sufism, and I'd never really heard of Sufism before, so I was intrigued by that, and I thought maybe this is a way in to Islam, you know, bearing in mind that I hadn't had much success before. Maybe this is something that I can do. One evening I took myself from Guildford in the car, and I went to Slough to visit this meditation zikr group. And I was just struck by the warmth of the people. You know, people wanted to know why I was there and what I thought of Islam, and you know, and the focus was very much on Islam. It wasn't on any particular type of Islam. I think that my first trip there was at the beginning of March, and by sort of early June, a friend of mine had just sort of said, you know, have you ever thought of taking Shahada? And I realised that, yeah, it had been something that I just, for no other reason, I just put off. But yes, I was ready to take Shahada. This is a dargah. It's a place of Sufi meditation, zikr. It's also a mosque. I've been coming here on and off for the last 10 years to do zikr and to pray Isha namaz. And it's the place that I took Shahada 10 years ago.
I met Abdul Malik in Slough about 10 years ago. He was interested in Islam, and particularly the path that we follow, known as commonly as Sufism. And first time he came to one of our gatherings in Slough, which is like a weekly zikr again. And this is where me and Abdul Malik met. And at that time he hadn't converted to Islam, so he came just to see what we're doing and what it's all about. And then from that he saw what we were doing, and then he accepted after a while, took Shahada.
I spent a lot of my life sort of living on my own, dreaming of having a family, and not even being able to comprehend what it would be like to have children running around and not have many moments free in the day, whereas that's exactly how things are now. I have quite a large family, and it's a real joy for me. Marriage has been difficult. It has its ups and its downs, but it's a real foundation for my life, and it's helped me very much getting through problems that I've had, and I think it's helped me in the long run with my faith and my practice, and being a better person and a better Muslim.
My name is Uzma Harding, and I've got 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. And I met Abdul Malik 8 years ago in a community centre. Basically, we used to go for zikr, and we met through our family friends. And basically, it's strange. People think that an English guy and Asian woman maybe love marriage, but it's not. It's totally arranged marriage. And we got married within 40 days. And we had quite a simple but very big wedding. And quite interesting because his family came to our house, first family friends gathering. And then after 2 weeks, he took me out to London to a restaurant, and he proposed to me just after 2 weeks. And he said, you don't need to say yes or no now. But think about it. My relationship with my mother-in-law is very good, even we're two different people from two different cultures. And she said to me one day, and I was over the moon, she said that my sister-in-law had a bit of argument with her because my mother-in-law, she was taking my side, like defending me for something more than her. She goes like, I'm your daughter and she's your daughter-in-law. But mom said, no, I'm not talking about that. But that girl made place in my heart, and I was like, wow, that was brilliant. I was really over the moon. So I got really good relationship, you know, so it's nice.
I approached Islam in a different way, probably because it's not my culture, it's my faith. So maybe somebody who was born into Islam, where it's part of their cultural identity, so it can tick over sometimes for them, and they can take it for granted. Whereas I don't have that, so it has to always. I have to validate everything, and it has to make sense to me. You know, I have to really make it work. But you know, I have to understand what I'm doing and feel what I'm doing. Otherwise, you know, it's easy to become disillusioned or confused with things because I don't have the sort of cultural background in Islam. Sometimes being a revert in a mainly community where you have one main ethnic group can be difficult. I mean, for instance, you know, you tend to stick out when you walk into a mosque, being sort of the only English guy in the mosque. And I sometimes think, you know, maybe I know from travelling abroad that, you know, it's culturally okay to stare in countries like, you know, India. People tend to stare at you for quite long periods of time, whereas in this country it can be seen as quite aggressive to stare. So sometimes I feel a bit uneasy walking into a mosque. People stare at me, and I have to remind myself that this is just a difference in the culture. But it can sometimes be quite difficult. If you're having a bad day and you walk in and people are, you know, giving you a big stare, that sort of thing. And I'm aware that when I do go to a place where it's mainly English people, sometimes I'll walk up and I'll find myself in a situation that surprises me because I think I'm English. This is where I'm from, but obviously I don't appear to them. Well, maybe they're aware of my Muslim beliefs. So yeah, it can be a bit strange. You know, when I'm with Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, and I always feel that I stand out as the convert, and yet actually sometimes probably I don't. And when I'm with the English people, I always think that I just look like another English person, but increasingly I'm aware that I don't. So it's a strange sort of balance, you know. I would say to anybody who's thinking of becoming a Muslim, don't be lost in the culture or feel the need to adopt an outward appearance in order to validate your identity as a Muslim. Try and concentrate on and focus on the inner and on what Islam means to you and what you mean to your faith and to God. I think if people try to adopt other cultures too quickly or in too great a sense, then you can very quickly get lost about who you are, and then you'll start to maybe struggle about why you came to this faith, and that's probably true of all faiths. So I would always say stay true to your reasons and focus on what it is that draws you towards Islam. The reaction of my family to my reversion was it's difficult because I'd been on this journey for such a long time and I'd tried other things, that it must have occurred to them that eventually I would adopt a faith, and I was probably going to end up adopting a faith that wasn't Western, wasn't European probably. So I think they'd probably known that anyway. My sister travelled quite widely around India and Southeast Asia, and she studied yoga and meditation in India. So I think they were probably ready for the idea that I would adopt a faith from outside of the sort of Western world. But maybe they were slightly uncomfortable with the idea that I'd become a Muslim. But if they were, they certainly didn't show it. They gave every evidence that they accepted my decision and respected it. And they accepted my friends' in Slough, and the sort of the things that I enjoyed doing, that they seem to respect that as well. I converted in 2002, so it will be my 10th anniversary in this June. I was aware of the Islamophobia following 9/11. I was actually working on an account at the time. I was out of the office working in an account, and I remember they had Radio 1 on, and in the middle of the afternoon show they suddenly started talking about this plane had just flown into the side of the Twin Towers. And I just wrapped things up and said, I'm going to go home now. And I think everybody was in a stage of shock, and I just, shot home on my motorcycle, and I stuck the news on, and I just sat and I watched it and tried to digest it. And yes, there was a lot of rhetoric, Islamophobic rhetoric in the media, but I wasn't convinced. It was actually on the evening of 9/11. I met a friend in a pub, and he was a freelance video editor at the BBC, and he told me about the footage that I think some American networks had aired of possibly Egyptians burning the US flag and clapping, and how they'd just shown this on TV and said, this is what they're doing now following the Twin Towers. And then he said, but we know that footage. That footage was from Libya when the US attacked Tripoli several years ago. But they've reeled it out, polished it off, and they're playing it now to give an impression that Muslim people are happy that the Twin Towers came down. So I knew straight away, even on that evening, that there was a lot of spin going on. And I became quite angry with the amount of spin and very much the slant that the BBC were giving it, because I'd watched the BBC News and I listened to the radio quite a lot. So I guess I wasn't taken in either initially or afterwards. I'm still not sure how I feel about 9/11. I feel angry because a lot of innocent people died, and that made me feel quite sick. But I don't see that as a fault of Islam. For me, the thing that first struck me about Islam, and I was probably looking at it through the lens of almost Buddhism and this idea of meditation and this idea of just calm. It was the knowledge that 5 times a day Muslims pray, and during that prayer, when they make the azan and they make the intention to prayer, it's like everything's being thrown behind them, and the focus is on their prayer and their connection with God through that prayer. And it's this idea of 5 times a day, from early in the morning until late at the night, you just pause and you put these things behind you and you focus, and it's just that space. And I just think in the life we live, and all the confusion and all the stress and the pressures that are on everybody, and the pressures just seem to get worse every day, this ability just to put it behind you, it's almost like it's almost like a gift. It's almost like saying, whatever's happening, put it to one side and focus on this. And you do that, and then you come back to whatever's happening, and things just fall into place, or you just get through it, or you can make more of it. And I look at people who don't have this faith, and I think, how do you get through that without this? And I know people have other faiths and they go to church and they pray, but it's just to have this routine, these 5 prayers, just to cut the day up, split the day up, and focus on something else. I think that's for me, that was the real profound idea.